I'm delighted to welcome you to another episode of It's Not That Simple. Today, we're reaching for the stars, figuratively, of course. We're delving into space exploration, and we're going to do it with the brilliant Dr. Ezinne Uzo-Okoro. Welcome.
Thank you.
So much to talk about. Just a little bit of background on your fantastic career. I won't hit all the marks, but just the most important ones. Of course, former Assistant Director for Space Policy at the White House's Office of Science and Technology Policy. You're currently at the Belfer Center for Science and International Senior Fellow there at Harvard Kennedy School, among other roles. I'm looking forward to this conversation because you spent 2 decades working for government, pretty much involved in around 60 NASA missions, if I'm not mistaken. We'll get into the technical aspect of space exploration in a moment, Ezinne, but first of all, I'm really curious to find out how a girl from Nigeria ends up working for NASA in the United States. I know you studied computer science in college already in the States. How did that happen? The nutshell version, of course.
Thank you for having me, Pedro. It's truly remarkable. I was at the job fair that every university holds, your senior year, and NASA had a table there. I didn't know anything about space, and he happened to have a really long line, and I said, well, if you have a really long line, people are saying you're not accepting resumes. Why are you here? And I think that the blessing I received from my parents was two things: the ability to continue to be curious and to ask questions, and be assertive. And so I was assertive, and he was surprised that I was assertive and said, well, if you're so bold to ask me why I'm here and not accepting CVs and resumes, then let me see what your CV looks like. And he took mine, and I ended up being the only one at that job fair to get a job at NASA. And I thought, space sounds interesting. I'll do it for a year or two. But I was humbled and struck when I got there. I felt like a child in a candy store. There was so much to learn. There were so many parts of engineering. At that point, I only had a computer science degree, so I knew something about software, obviously not everything at the time. And I was interested in artificial intelligence then, language models, which is trending today. And it was so interesting to see electrical engineers, optical engineers, power engineers, propulsion engineers all work together, and someone called a chief engineer who oversaw all of them. He was like a conductor, conducting a symphony. And the most beautiful part of it is failure was not an option. You had to do it so well. You had to manage your risk profile such that the mission was a success, and most NASA missions are successful. And I saw that conductor, chief engineer figure, and I said, I want to do that, and I want to be that someday. And I ended up being there for 17 years, and as you mentioned, working on over 60 missions.
That's unbelievable, and you've had several roles in this landscape.
That's right.
Engineer, technical expert, manager, executive. Obviously, you've dealt with a lot of scientists, managers, politicians. When it comes to space, how does everyone see it, and how easy or not is it to get people around the table to understand really the potential and the challenges that there is in space exploration from your experience?
Quite like every topic, including cooking, people have different views and different sentimental values that they attach to things. The Generation X are the easiest to talk to about space, whether it's science exploration specifically, and scientists, physicists, and astrophysicists who really care about looking at supernova or exoplanets that we could live on, potentially, to those who just watched the moon landing when they were 5 or 6 and wanted to continue, and they themselves want to play a role in it. But everybody else, I think you just have to meet them where they are. And what I love about my career is the ability to translate technical information into digestible, simpler forms, if you will. And with politicians, they want to understand either what we're spending so much money on, how difficult this really is, and how their constituents can benefit from the space race or the space innovation of the day, how they can contribute, and also how we're faring against other countries. And then when you get to other engineers, they either want additional resources so that they can complete their mission. They're not thinking about the budget or other agencies. I think meeting people where they are is really important, but there are some who believe that space should exist just for scientific exploration. There's some who believe that space should exist for commercial exploration because it's the next gold rush. So, and then there are people in between. So how do you parse through all those opinions and actually develop policy in the case of the White House that suits everyone, that gives a demand signal to the private sector, that gives the resources to the scientists and engineer, and also satiates the constituents of politicians?
There's so many aspects of space that we could explore. I'm going to try to fire off questions in different kind of topics, and I'll try to get your expertise, and we'll make it as easily digestible as possible. I wanted to talk to you about the role of space exploration and how we can learn more about our planet. One of those areas, obviously, is climate change, with everything that's been happening in that aspect in recent decades. And I wanted to talk to you about satellites that are used to monitor weather on the planet and what has been seen recently, because obviously we all feel climate change, I think, intensely. Here in Portugal, mostly with fires, and I think it's the extreme nature of all these natural phenomena. So before fires happen, floods happen, but the level of gravity of them and the rate at which they happen both have increased a lot. So what have we learned from satellites in space regarding climate change on the planet?
We have learned that it is indeed changing, and we have learned that we can do two things. We can monitor, because satellites, the beautiful thing about them is that they're non-discriminatory. It's just a camera. It shows you what it sees. And we can bolster some of the low-hanging fruit in terms of solutions.
Okay.
So there are lots of smaller companies, actually, with small weather satellites that are helping to predict these weather storms ahead of time, so that local municipalities can prepare and adjust before the storm comes. And then there are wider-ranging solutions, like how do we move towards a carbon-neutral world, because we see that with more carbon in the air, there are effects to when these storms occur. And thirdly, there is an area of science, it's called geoengineering, where people are looking at studying clouds specifically, studying the stratosphere, so that we can learn if indeed being carbon neutral solves our problem, if we need other solutions. So there are lots of questions, but satellites do play quite an important role for weather, for hurricanes. One of the satellites I was actually most proud of working on was called the Global Precipitation Measurement Mission. And what it did was it measured precipitation of every kind. And so today, because these satellites have such a longevity, it helps to predict hurricanes and save lives.
Wow.
And that's just crucial, because from fires to floods to dust storms, we need ways to monitor and bolster our solutions, and satellites are helping us do a lot of that work.
I imagine that with satellites and other apparatus that are sent out into space, that there could be an issue with space junk, right? And this is an area, of course, that you have expertise in as well. What is exactly space debris? How is it created? And is there an issue that needs to be addressed, in your opinion?
Right, so space debris, we all played with, destructive things as children. And debris is anything that scatters from an explosion or from a collision. And so in space, when you have satellites that are old and are no longer functioning and perhaps collide with another satellite, then they end up with bits and pieces of different sizes. that end up polluting our environment up there in space. Similarly, national security defense departments across the world have conducted some missile tests in the past. The US recently, in the last 2 years, banned what we call anti-satellite missile tests. But those also cause a great amount of debris. Russia conducted a recent one less than 2 years ago, which led to our taking the step to ban those tests. And so when you have these chunks of debris that right now are numbering in the tens of thousands, wow. How do you prevent current satellites from being hit? And remember, everything in space is moving at least 20,000 kilometers per hour. So a paint chip moving through this atmosphere here wouldn't harm me or you, but a paint chip moving at that speed in space could harm an astronaut doing a spacewalk outside the International Space Station. So thankfully, there's a portion of the US Defense Department that today monitors all space debris. Most of what we can see, the tinier space debris, we say smaller than 5 centimeters, very difficult to monitor for obvious reasons because they're so tiny. And those are the hardest to clean up. But sometimes you have what we call rocket bodies, so a big chunk of a rocket about the size of the door of a car could be floating around in space. And when we see that moving towards, say, the Chinese space station or a Turkish satellite, then the US government gives them a call and tells them to maneuver out of the way.
You mentioned the International Space Station.
That's right.
I believe it's going to be decommissioned in a few years. Why, how, and what's the importance of making sure that there is a safe deorbit process that goes on here?
So the International Space Station is a tremendous beacon of international success,
right?
And international cooperation. The fact that the United States and Russia have 2 key parts of that station needs to be mentioned over and over again, because even throughout the remainder of the Cold War, when it was in operation, we still worked with them cooperatively on the International Space Station, which is remarkable. And so the way the system works is the US portion cannot function without the Russia portion. But the system is over 20 years old and needs to be retired. So there is a policy in place to retire it by 2030. And with that brings lots of challenges. Like, how do we move the thousands of scientific research? If you just think of the academic research, the middle school students, the elementary school students sending up little, science experiments to the International Space Station, how do we transition that to what will be a commercially owned and operated space station? That's a challenge in itself. And so, but it presents an opportunity to the private sector, because what you will have is likely not just one large international space station. We will probably have a number of smaller modules, perhaps one to serve government scientific research, like pharmaceutical research, microgravity research, biotechnology research, and another to perhaps serve space tourism and spacewalks. And so there are a number of companies in the running looking to build a replacement. And it's an exciting time, because this is an inflection point for that transition. You probably remember the transition of the shuttle program from government-owned and operated to what we have now, which is a commercially owned and operated shuttle, if you will.
I want to actually get your opinion on that, because personally, they couldn't pay me enough to get me up into space, but I know there's people who are paying millions, I imagine, to go up there. The privatization of space exploration and travel, what do you make of that? And are there perils that are kind of associated with that? How does the government look at that as well? Because it's such a competitive area normally between different governments. So with private companies coming in and joining this kind of race, so to speak, what's your view on that?
It's exciting, but we have to pay attention to the pitfalls. Think of a rural community where every house is about 2 miles apart. And then all of a sudden, you have developers moving in, they're going to build apartments, they're going to build cafes, and they're going to develop this rural area. That's what's happening in space. On the government side, it is opportunistic because then the government doesn't have to create all the technologies. We can just buy services from the private sector. But on the other hand, if you look at the last space treaty that was ratified by the United Nations, that was done in 1967. So there aren't regulations that are up to date for space robotics, for instance. If you want to clean up space debris, if you want to study climate change in a way that uses robotic assembly or robotic manufacturing in space. So what we tried to do on the policy side at the White House during my time there was to create policy that enabled and empowered not just the private sector, but regulators within the government to regulate these new activities so that they can be possible. So there is a gold rush. It feels like the Wild West.
Yeah.
But we need some caution to ensure that space continues to be peaceful and sustainable.
Yeah, and also that there's a responsibility in having standards of what's safe for, I guess I don't want to call them amateurs, but let's say private entities that are joining this kind of landscape. It's insane because there's so many areas of this topic that we could get into, and I know we only have half an hour. I wanted to talk about the moon and the fact that obviously a few decades ago there was a very politicized race between the US and the Soviet Union to be the first to get there. Then after that was over and done with, it lost a lot of its attraction. And I wanted you to explain to everyone why haven't we as human beings been back to the moon as often as we could have, maybe to explore it, maybe for scientific research purposes. You can obviously tell me why we would want to go or not, but and if you expect that to change in the coming years at all.
So it is going to change.
Okay.
We are going back to the moon. The last president of the United States created that vision, and the current president intends to send not just the first woman, but the first person of color back to the moon. So it's an exciting vision that NASA is working towards. But if we go back 76 years to that space race, another thing is different today. Other countries are not looking to just cheer us on while we race with one country.
They want to be part of it, right?
They want to be part of it. So what we're seeing now is that everyone wants to go to space together. And so NASA had to go through this assessment of other astronauts. Oh, countries want to come with us. And they ended up picking a Canadian astronaut. So a Canadian astronaut will go with US astronauts when they return to the moon. Another thing that has changed since we last went to the moon is also priorities. One thing policy makes very clear is that everything is important. Your health is important. Cancer research is important. Hearing aids are important. Improving roads and bridges and schools are important. And since everyone cares about that and a country needs to prioritize all those things, sometimes space isn't the top 3 priorities. And so we went there once when it was very high priority. There was a race. We are a very competitive nation. And given the cost and the amount of resources it takes to train an astronaut.
How much does it cost, to kind of send someone or a team of astronauts to the moon?
Oh, billions a year. Billions a year. And the NASA budget has not grown very much. It's been adjusted for inflation over the last 40 to 60 years, but it hasn't grown exponentially. And we still explore rovers. We still explore the surface of Mars using rovers. We still explore and monitor our climate, as we discussed. We still work to clean up space debris, and a whole plethora of exoplanet and supernova and distant star exploration and telescopes. Those telescopes that give us those fantastic images of the galaxy are expensive. So NASA has to prioritize where resources can be placed. And usually the vision to go to the moon has to come from a president because it's just so costly. And so we have that now, and NASA is being given the resources to plan a return to the moon. And it's nice to be alive and be able to hopefully witness it.
Do you think we'll see it in the next, 5 to 10 years? Maybe.
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely. Space station possible up there? Would it make sense?
A space station on the moon?
On the moon?
There might be some modules on the moon. There are commercial companies planning for lots of different modules on the moon. But a space station that still exists in our atmosphere in what we call low Earth orbit, about 600 kilometers, 400 to 600 kilometers above the Earth, we hope will be replaced in less than 7 years.
Okay. Let's go a little bit further. Let's go to Mars.
Okay.
Whether it's in science fiction or in kind of informal conversations, when people say in gist, oh, it's fine, if our planet just doesn't survive that long, we'll go to another one, we'll colonize Mars. Every scientist or every expert I've talked to has said, Pedro, this is nonsense, at least at a kind of a short term. What do you think of taking humans to Mars?
That's another very complex idea. I mean, try going to the Atacama Desert in Chile and surviving there for 6 months first.
Yeah,
and if
with
you
our
love,
atmosphere, right?
That's right. If
Yeah.
you love that experience with our atmosphere, and of
Yeah.
course you've got to take everything with you, all the water you need, all the food you need, your mattress, things to keep you occupied. If you do that successfully for 6 months, then let's talk about going to Mars. Because even people who spend time in Antarctica will tell you it's complex living, and it's difficult living in that part of Earth that's uncomfortable, and we have the same gravity, the same atmosphere, let alone a different atmosphere. And unlike what you see in the movies, we don't have potatoes growing there. We don't have any infrastructure.
Maybe if Matt Damon went, we would.
There's no
anyway.
cabin waiting for you.
Yeah.
So it's going to be a long road. There are companies obviously still working on this dream, and we encourage all of it. But we shouldn't kid ourselves at how easy it is.
But scientifically, are these trips worth it? Are there discoveries that are made, whether it's for medicine, whether that's for technology here on Earth, that justify these investments? Because I guess that's what it comes down to, right? Besides the kind of political aspect, the scientific aspect as an investment, is it worth it?
There are vast benefits of space exploration to our day-to-day lives.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of space, not just in global communications or weather monitoring, but in robotic technology, like prosthetics, for instance, came as a result as an invention that came as an indirect result of space exploration. So there are thousands of examples like that are indirect results of innovations from space technologies. And that's not the direct results. And so when you ask if there are benefits, there are scientific benefits that we see because we must understand what our neighbors are like. We must understand the climate near us. You may have heard of a DART mission where we redirected an asteroid that was going to hit the planet. And so somebody has to do that. That's protecting all of us. So this is not even country specific. This is us as a human race. And so scientifically, there are critical things we need to do, like monitor asteroids and understand who's around us. And then there are critical exploration needs about that help us really understand what's around us. What's on Mars, what's on the moon, what's on Venus, what's on Saturn way over there, and then hopefully soon what's outside our solar system, which the telescopes are doing for us. And it just, armed with more information, we are a more knowledgeable species, and we can live safely here without comets or asteroids, visiting us.
And putting us at risk, right?
And putting us at risk, that's right.
2 final questions before we get into the quick fire. One of them has to do with international cooperation, because we talked about the International Space Station, but for me it's crazy that there is not more, let's just say, teamwork between the superpowers when it comes to space exploration, whether that's the United States or Russia or China. Is it possible to dream of a world where, obviously now with the situation with Russia, it's very complex what's happening, but let's do mid to long term, that there can be an international space collaboration that can share information, and just, when you talk about safety, that's important, but that can benefit the human race overall, like if there's more knowledge sharing, information sharing, data sharing.
My
Too
view,
naive?
and my view is that if we could do this with Russia and the International Space Station, and exempt the International Space Station and our cooperation with Russia from sanctions over the last 25 years, we can do this too. And I think that I don't know when we will turn the corner, but we have to turn the corner. And you have to think of space, even though the lines are blurred, in three different areas. There's civil space, which is what the civil agencies like NASA and the European Space Agency focuses on. And so they could share data on human safety, on the safety of astronauts and taikonauts and cosmonauts, for instance. There is commercial space, which is this privatization race we have today. And you could see that being a place of strategic competition. You could also see the third area, space security, so national security being a space, an area of strategic competition as well. But my hope is that in the area of civil space, we can cooperate more, not just with China and with Russia, as we've done with Russia over the last 25 years, but also with new spacefaring nations, because everyone believes in, inspiring their citizens by exploring space in some way, shape, or form.
Okay. Last question, and obviously this could be a topic all in itself for a different conversation, but just your opinion of the impact of AI in the space industry, and whether this can also speed up the kind of knowledge of, I guess, the private sector of the history of space travel and exploration. What do you think the role of artificial intelligence is?
See, thankfully, artificial intelligence is a very broad topic, and learning starts quite like we learn as babies to communicate in our mother tongues and languages. Artificial intelligence includes autonomy applications. It includes learning capabilities on multiple scales. So we are not going to move from having nothing to the point where, say, a robot or a regenerative artificial intelligence agent is controlling satellites. Our risk profile will always be conservative, because we have human lives at stake in space, and because these satellites are costly, as mentioned, and so we need them to complete their mission and last a long time. So there are elements of autonomy applications that are inserted into software slowly, and you will see that not just in space applications broadly, but also in applications, for instance, medical research, things that affect human lives. So we will take a conservative posture while using the technology to improve efficiency, to improve compute power, for instance, but we will still require human judgment for a very long time.
I really hope so. All right, quick fire time.
Yes.
So in one word or one sentence, I'd like you to answer these questions. First one is, what is one quality, one personality trait that a good leader could benefit from having?
Humility.
Comes up a lot. I'm glad you said that. What is the biggest challenge in the world for our generation at the moment?
Working together.
You're very precise on these. I like it. If you could change one thing in the world by magic, what would that be?
Eliminating food insecurity.
Okay, and I know you've done some work in that area too. And finally, what is the most important learning of your career?
be kind and grab an oar. There are lots of problems, and everybody just needs to row. And either be the captain or follow a captain and just solve some bit of the problems that we have.
Ezinne, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us here, and it's not that simple. Hopefully we've been able to break down some of the complex areas of this topic. Congratulations on your career, and it's been a delight to be able to talk to you here today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, Ezinne. Fascinating to approach this subject of space exploration and get to learn something about which I'm sure so many of us were obsessed with growing up in some shape or form, and I feel we've learned a lot about this theme, which is so important to the present and the future of our planet as we continue to learn what's around us. See you soon on another episode of It's Not That Simple.